Nava Elimelech was born on March 20th, 1970, in Bat Yam, Israel, as the youngest child of Machluf and Maisel Elimelech. The couple already had 3 children: Josie, the eldest, Jacob, the second, and Ephrat, the first daughter. When Nava arrived, she quickly became the cherished youngest of the family. Machluf and Maisel were distant relatives. At the age of 14, Maisel was sent to Israel after 2 of her family members were abducted by Arabs. To immigrate without her parents, she claimed to be 4 years older. She traveled with Machluf's mother and sister. Love soon blossomed between Machluf and Maisel, and after their marriage, they faced difficult living conditions in Jerusalem, often going days without steady work, bread, or vegetables. Despite these hardships, they fondly remembered the strong sense of community, friendship, and mutual support that defined those times. Josie and Jacob were born in Jerusalem while their father worked at a factory called the American Shoe Factory. When the factory closed, Machluf moved to Bat Yam for work, seeing his family only on weekends. Eventually, the family relocated to Bat Yam as well, where Ephrat and Nava were later born. Like her siblings, Nava also attended the school on the same street where they lived. She was in the 3rd grade when she met one of her favorite teachers, a sports teacher and assistant principal. He described Nava's bright, joyful eyes and her aptitude in sports, particularly volleyball, and encouraged her to consider a sports career as she seriously enjoyed every physical activity. Nava consistently excelled academically and socially in school. She was well regarded by her peers and teachers, who described her as responsible, diligent, and excelling not just in sports but also in theoretical subjects. Another teacher called her a brilliant girl who was meticulous in writing and who decorated her notebooks beautifully. Nava was well behaved, informed her parents about her activities, and despite being at an age for mischief, was not adventurous. Nava and her siblings hailed from a loving and supportive family and reciprocated this support and trust by striving to be above-average students, endearing themselves to all their teachers. In the summer of 1981, Nava and her family spent time at a hotel in Eilat, where the then Israeli Prime Minister also arrived as part of his bustling 1981 electoral campaign. Nava's charismatic presence caught his attention, and he requested a photograph with her. Being the youngest in the family, her siblings were extremely caring and affectionate towards her. Her relatives described her as a joyful individual whose presence was strongly felt both within and outside the family home. On March 20th, 1982, a sunny Saturday, Nava's interaction with her parents was perfectly normal. Breaking his routine, Jacob, her older brother who was already married, unlike every Shabbat, chose to stay with his wife instead of visiting his parents. By noon, the married couple retired to their bedroom. Nava went out. She left behind a note for her parents which had the following message: "To Mom and Dad and the whole family, I'm going to Tali. Don't worry, I'll be back home. I love you very much. Nava." Nava was deeply rooted in her Jewish traditions and family. She eagerly awaited her bat mitzvah, significant for her spiritual and communal responsibilities in Judaism, but she had to wait as she was only 11 years and 3 months old. That Saturday, dressed in red trousers and a matching shirt, Nava was seen by her sister, Ephrat, who was across the street with friends. Shortly afterward, Ephrat thought she heard Nava calling out but saw nothing when she turned around. Upon reaching home, Ephrat informed her mother that Nava was meeting Tali. However, concern rose when Tali called, stating Nava hadn't arrived. Alarmed, the parents immediately reported Nava's disappearance to the police, who initiated investigations that night. In the subsequent days, the police and volunteers extensively searched the region, distributing Nava's photographs, using dogs to trace scent in nearby dunes, and interrogating neighbors. 10 days post-disappearance, unsettling developments emerged. Some reports claimed a bag containing part of a leg from a young body was found on a beach in northern Tel Aviv and was quickly identified as Nava's. Further body parts surfaced on the shores in the following days, riveting the nation with the gruesome details of the case. Contrary to other versions, it was indicated that 10 days after her disappearance, some individuals discovered Nava's head wrapped in plastic, with other plastic-wrapped body parts found on Tel Baruch Beach. It is indisputable that upon submitting the remains for forensic examination, a pathologist who meticulously analyzed the body parts concluded that Nava had been murdered on the day she went missing. The Central Police Unit of Tel Aviv took charge of the investigation, but not a single clue was uncovered. Lifeguards, boat owners, and regular beach visitors were questioned, yet none had seen a man carrying suspicious bags in the area. Following the murder, the police assembled a team of 40 investigators and detectives who labored on the case for several months, marking it as one of the most extensive operations in the history of Israeli police. The investigation was challenging due to the absence of weapons or evidence at the crime scene. The team interviewed scores of people at various levels and even dispatched some of the severed body parts to a London lab to deduce a likely murder weapon. But all efforts to resolve the case were unsuccessful. Initially, it was speculated that Nava's murder was an act of revenge against her family, as inferred by the remarks of the head of the Bat Yam police station. He noted that the method of dismembering the body and discarding it into the sea seemed intentional. The country was in turmoil. People withdrew from public affection. Streets were devoid of children. And Nava's murder, occurring on a serene Saturday noon, shook the nation's peace and revealed a vulnerability. The moment of body identification by Nava's mother was recalled as particularly harrowing. Under intense pressure, the mother was allowed to identify the body, which was prepared in such a way that only the head was visible. The whole identification scene left everyone present in shock. Following the identification, Nava's family organized the funeral. Hundreds from the region came to pay their respects. Investigators held that the killer couldn't have acted alone due to the mutilation and the moving of the body without being discovered. The commander of the Tel Aviv Police District stated that the investigation team was one of the largest ever assembled, involving various specialists. Intense efforts yielded no results, leading to public distress and imposed curfews for children. In 1982, the police focused on sexual offenders, but every lead seemed to be a dead end. Police cadaver dogs, which had smelled clothes Elimelech had worn, led investigators to the home of David Levy, a Bat Yam resident who lived close to the home of the Elimelech family and who had at one time worked with Elimelech's father. In his home, authorities found pictures of Elimelech and her friends. A police search was conducted, but no evidence was found connecting him to the murder. However, Levy was discovered to have taken nude photos of female students at Gordon Elementary School. He was subsequently convicted of pedophilia and jailed. An Arab resident from Gaza was also detained but released due to lack of evidence. Despite various theories, including that of a nationalist terrorist organization's involvement, doubts remained, and after many leads, arrests, and releases, the case went cold. In 1998, police arrested brothers Yehuda and Amos Shalef as suspects in the killing after Yehuda's ex-wife claimed he had confessed to committing the murder to her. Yehuda's home was searched and his yard was excavated, but no evidence was found. The brothers were ultimately released due to lack of evidence. Nava's mother, Maisel, expressed her continual hope for justice, feeling Nava's presence despite the years past. Criminologist Avi Davidovich theorized that Nava was likely a victim of a serial killer, citing other similar disappearances between 1974 and 1994. He believed it was likely that all the murders were committed by the same individual. He maintained that the police would have had a better chance if they had made the connection with the other incidents at the time. However, he also said that they shouldn't be blamed because the police back then didn't have the level of experience that today's police have. On December 31, 2001, Yitzhak Gatnio, one of the original investigating officers, was interviewed on the Galitz News channel. Following some comments about the murder, he disclosed that the Israeli security agency did find evidence supporting the theory that the operation had been executed by a nationalist terrorist organization. The information came from an imprisoned Arab criminal who collaborated with the agency, asserting that one of his cellmates confessed to killing the 11-year-old girl. This man, a terrorist collaborator, had already been released from jail and fled to Jordan. Investigators disclosed that tests confirmed that this man was indeed in the neighborhood when Nava disappeared. He wasn't investigated at that time, and as far as Yitzhak knew, the man had died in Jordan. In September 2010, the police commissioner received a letter reminding him that the 1982 murder of Nava remained unsolved. In the letter, it was highlighted the enduring pain of the Elimelech family, and their sorrow was compounded by knowing that the heinous murder had not been resolved by Israeli police. She asked the commissioner to inform the Elimelech family about which unit was handling the murder case and requested that the investigative team communicate with her as the family representative to update them on any progress in the murder investigation. The first police response was received 2 days later, confirming receipt of the request and promising prompt action due to the importance of the matter. However, time kept passing, and in 2012, 30 years after Nava's murder, the family was still in immense pain, and all who knew the girl wondered if they had done enough. Remorse consumed a neighbor who hadn't opened the door when Nava rang the intercom, compounded by the family's questioning. Nava's brothers hadn't lost hope of finding the perpetrator. They mainly wanted to give an answer to their parents, who were over 80 years old and were waiting every day for the news of the capture of their daughter's murderer. They said with sorrow that their mother Maisel hoped the monster would be caught while she was still alive, but she was getting weaker and was crying out for a response from the police. They highlighted that the worst part was not knowing where they stood because no one spoke to them honestly. In 2019, another significant event occurred. With court approval, the police exhumed Nava's remains for additional testing. Investigators then reported that they had compiled a profile of the killer, implying that he was still alive, around 70 years old, and was about 30 at the time of the crime. They added that he was someone with a criminal record living in central Israel. A total of 100 detectives were assigned to the case after its reopening due to advancements in DNA identification technology. The investigation was highly confidential. On August 29th, Amos Shilov, once a person of interest in the case, appeared for questioning regarding the crime. However, the reason wasn't clear as he wasn't considered a suspect. Upon entering the station, he declared that his summoning was complete nonsense. His lawyer conveyed the impression that the police were clueless and were merely redoing an investigation that had yielded nothing in the past. He added that the exhumation of the body seemed unwarranted and the police were trying to cover their mistakes by all means possible. In the 4 weeks since Nava's body was exhumed, the autopsy was performed. However, it did not yield any information that could advance the investigation as the remains were in a very poor state. During this time in August 2019, the police gave Nava's parents the earrings she was wearing when she was killed, but did not inform them when or where they were found. One of the brothers said at that time that there was no new information apart from the earrings, which definitely gave them hope because the police said that once the investigation concluded, they would provide the family with all the answers. Currently, the case remains open and no new information has been revealed due to a gag order placed on the publication of any details. The police were brief in the information they provided, stating only that the exhumation of the body had taken place recently in coordination with Nava's family. They also mentioned that the investigation was being overseen by the District Attorney's Office of Tel Aviv. In 2019, Maisel, Nava's 90-year-old mother, told the Israeli media that the family agreed to do everything possible to uncover the truth and find out who committed this atrocity. She added that she would give her life and whatever it took to find the person who took her 11-year-old girl away. She also made an important point that she had no idea who her daughter's killer could be, but believed that the friend Nava went to visit and her mother did know but didn't want to speak the truth. It's true that Tali and all her other friends were investigated, and although she was interrogated repeatedly, no evidence was found linking her to the events. An investigator who was part of the Bat Yam police at the time of the crime indicated that there was a large team of agents working exclusively with the family and friends to follow any lead, no matter how minimal, and they found nothing on Tali. Therefore, he didn't believe that she had anything to do with the murder. Nava's sister stated that they agreed to open her grave because the mystery of her murder lingered with them every day while their elderly and sick parents continued to fight undaunted, waiting for an answer and a resolution. One of Nava's brothers mentioned in an interview that the police had told the family that with the new technology available, progress could be made in the case. He affirmed that they were still clinging to hope because his sister was a kind-hearted little girl, and one awful day, their world collapsed with her disappearance and death. Suspects, searches, investigation teams, special research teams, significance, conjecture, speculation, and zero results. The killer or killers have not been discovered to this day. The Case of Yvonne Baldelli, a hellish love story on a heavenly island. Sometimes, the pursuit of paradise on earth leads straight into a living hell, one from which there is no escape. Yet it's important to remember that much depends on who accompanies you on that journey. Choosing a companion should always be done with the greatest care and caution. Still, even those who seem the closest and most loving can reveal themselves to be merciless monsters. The story of Yvonne Baldelli and Brian Brimmager began like a fairy tale. Yvonne believed she had found the love of her life, someone worth following to the ends of the earth. But from the very start, her relationship raised alarm among her family, who strongly disapproved of her partner. Tragically, their fears would soon prove to be all too justified. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in love Yvonne left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in the swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Yvonne's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who was Yvonne Baldelli? Yvonne Olivia Baldelli Mayfold was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily, and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimmager was not only seeing Yvonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr. administration. When Yvonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on the tropical island. Yvonne shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Coronero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Yvonne informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Yvonne sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Coronero Island, where they rented a house right on the oceanfront. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Yvonne's business also developed very slowly with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister, Michelle Valenzuela, almost daily, sharing everything. But her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Yvonne hoped that Brian would propose and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, stopped receiving messages from Yvonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the US and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Yvonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Yvonne couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Yvonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Yvonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this. Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Yvonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Yvonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Ivan from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return. They would get married and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator, specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caramaro, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of bald Eli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Ryan was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently reouting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Yvonne had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Yvonne, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant, but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Yvonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winner discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail, Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winner, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence proving Ivan's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carnero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the waters, driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside. He looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Yvonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Yvonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using the machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Yvonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. Megan Sharpton was born on October 24, 1987 in the small American city of Tullahoma in the state of Tennessee. She grew up in a large and friendly family with 2 sisters and a brother with whom she got along very well. Her parents strove to give maximum attention to all their children, but Megan was especially close to her mother. From an early age, she helped her parents care for her younger siblings and was always eager to assist friends and family. During high school, Megan decided she wanted to become a nurse, which led her to enroll at Motlow Community College, located about 7 miles from her home. She also worked as a waitress at a local restaurant and eventually moved in with her boyfriend. In the summer of 2012, at the age of 24 and just a few months shy of finishing college, Megan planned to immediately find a job as a nurse. Shortly before her disappearance, she had also started working at a nursing home to gain practical skills in caring for the elderly. Despite her busy life, Megan tried to see her family whenever she could. On July 1st, her sister, who lived in another city, came home, and Megan promised to meet with her. However, that evening, Megan called her mother to say she would be delayed. She had been offered an interesting job opportunity and had arranged an interview for that night. She was excited about this opportunity and promised her mother that she would visit her as soon as the interview was over. According to her, the job involved taking care of an elderly woman. As time passed, there was no word from Megan. She did not respond to messages or calls. Her parents began to worry. They contacted her boyfriend, but he also did not know where Megan was and was unaware of any interview. Despite this, the parents decided not to panic and waited for their daughter to get in touch. At 24, with her schedule packed between her studies and 2 jobs, it was possible she was just busy. But Megan did not show up the next day. Meanwhile, in a remote area several kilometers from the city, around 1:30 a.m., a group of teenagers saw a fire in a field. Given the very hot summer, they thought wildfires might have spread to the grass. They immediately called the firefighters, who arrived at the scene to find an unexpected turn of events. Shortly after beginning to extinguish the flames, they discovered a body at the center of the fire. Once the fire was fully extinguished and the police arrived, they realized they were looking at a dead girl. It was clear that a murder had taken place. However, detectives could not establish the victim's identity immediately as she had no documents, wallet, or phone with her. Due to the effects of the fire, the features were unrecognizable. The only clues available to detectives were two small star-shaped tattoos. The investigation at the crime scene led to the conclusion that the girl was dead before the fire started. The victim suffered a serious head injury that appeared to be fatal. Yet no clues pointing to the presence of the killer were found. The victim was partially dressed, and from her shirt, the police deduced that the girl might have been a nurse. They also found that there were no missing person reports matching her description, which complicated the identification process. However, news quickly spread throughout the small town. Megan's mother saw a social media post about a young woman found dead in a field with two star-shaped tattoos and realized with horror that it was her daughter. Medical examiners eventually confirmed that the deceased was indeed Megan Sharpton. They determined that the cause of death was a bullet wound to the back of the head, supporting the police's theory that she was already dead at the time of the fire. Furthermore, she was killed elsewhere and her body was then moved to the field. She had also been subjected to violence prior to her death, and the experts were able to extract a DNA sample of the criminal. The DNA was immediately checked against the national database, but there were no matches. The detectives began by searching for Megan's car, a red Mustang. She had worked at a restaurant that night and had left in her vehicle. The car was nowhere to be found, indicating that the killer might have taken it somewhere that could yield crucial evidence. While its location remained unknown, the police began to look for potential suspects among Megan's acquaintances. Attention turned to her boyfriend, who became a significant person of interest. Megan's sister immediately expressed her suspicion to the detectives that he was involved in the murder, pointing out that the couple had been having relationship issues. Megan had been with him for 3 years, part of which they spent living together in an apartment they shared with another roommate, but he denied any involvement in the incident. Initially, he claimed that everything was fine between him and Megan, but eventually conceded that their relationship was troubled and heading towards a split. However, he insisted he had no motive for murder and provided an alibi for the time of her death. While the police were verifying his alibi, they decided to search the apartment where Megan and her boyfriend lived. In the bathroom, they found troubling evidence: traces of blood and syringes containing illicit substances. At the same time, 12 miles from the city, police found Megan's abandoned car in a secluded and remote area. There were no documents or phone inside, which meant the perpetrator could have taken or discarded them elsewhere. The police appealed to the public, asking anyone who found such items to contact them immediately. There were no signs of blood or a struggle in the car, but there was an intriguing clue: a note with a non-existent address. Investigators concluded that the unknown assailant had tried to lure Megan to a secluded place to commit the crime. Early in the investigation, they discovered that Megan was preparing for a job interview. However, they had no leads in that direction. One theory was that the person who offered her the job had given her a fake address. When the community learned of the details surrounding the case, a chilling connection was made. 6 months earlier, hundreds of miles from Tullahoma, another young woman of a similar age to Megan had disappeared without a trace. She was also a pharmacy student, which led many to fear that there could be a serial killer in the county. This only heightened the community's anxiety with concerns that the criminal might strike again. Meanwhile, the police questioned the roommate of Megan and her boyfriend, who admitted to using illicit substances. He claimed that Megan and her boyfriend were unaware of this and that they never partook themselves. Forensic experts analyzed the blood traces found and concluded that they indeed belonged to the roommate. However, the story did not end there. He revealed that Megan and her boyfriend's relationship had in fact ended some time ago, and he himself had recently started a relationship with Megan. He had kept his addiction hidden from her. Knowing this, the police began to suspect both her boyfriend and the roommate. The boyfriend might have harbored resentment towards Megan, and the roommate had a known drug habit, but there was no direct evidence against either of them. During questioning, he claimed he was unaware of the new relationship, and by this time, the police had already verified his alibi. He had been at work at the time of Megan's murder, which excluded him from the list of suspects. As for the roommate, he did not have a solid alibi. However, an analysis of his phone showed that he had been trying to reach Megan throughout the night and had sent her messages trying to find out where she was. Although this was not conclusive proof of his innocence, the police doubted he was the murderer. DNA samples were taken from both men and sent to the lab for analysis, but the results could take months. In the meantime, the detectives found a new lead. In the last interrogation, Megan's boyfriend mentioned he might help the investigation. On the day of Megan's disappearance, an unknown man had called her old phone, which was at home, wanting to speak to her about a job as a caregiver, saying that she had been recommended by someone named Naomi. He mentioned that Megan had spoken several times of a fellow student with that name, but he knew no further details. Police began searching among the students at Motlow College and soon found a student by that name. When detectives obtained her address, Naomi was not at home. Neighbors provided Naomi's phone number to the police. Naomi was surprised by the police call and claimed she barely knew Megan, having only met her in a few classes and never speaking much. Naomi insisted that she had not recommended Megan for any job and that Megan had bothered her, so she certainly wouldn't have helped her. The police were disappointed that this promising lead didn't yield further information, but they still had more substantial evidence to consider. Investigators handed over the phone, which had received the call about the job, and they had the caller's number in their possession. Experts determined that the call was made from a prepaid phone, making it impossible to establish the owner's name. However, the police traced the device back to the store where it was sold, which had a surveillance camera facing the checkout counter. Upon reviewing the footage from the day the phone was purchased, they immediately identified the buyer. From these images, the police inferred that the individual was purchasing the phone for some illicit purpose. Prepaid phones are popular among those involved in criminal activities in the United States because they do not require personal information for activation. And this person, seen taking out his own phone from his pocket at some point, indicated he was buying an additional phone for suspect purposes. There was also a camera pointing at the parking lot in the store. The police saw the buyer exit the building and get into his car, which soon led to establishing his identity. It turned out to be Timothy Gifford, who had an impressive criminal history. However, his activities were limited to minor drug dealings, and he had not been implicated in serious offenses. They soon tracked him down and brought him into the station. He said he bought the phone not for himself, but for a 37-year-old acquaintance named Donnie Jones, who was recuperating from surgery and couldn't pick up the phone himself. In exchange for this favor, Donnie gave Timothy some illegal pills. The detectives were familiar with Donnie, who also had an impressive criminal history, but often acted as an informant for the police. Despite this, no connection between Donnie and Megan was found until Timothy revealed something else. Donnie wanted to trade his van for a Mustang and asked for help with the exchange. Timothy found this request odd since Donnie had 2 young children and the Mustang isn't exactly known as a family car. Nevertheless, he agreed to try to find a buyer. Donnie handed over the van and Timothy noticed that inside the old vehicle, there were brand new carpets and seat covers. Donnie explained that his wife told him that the chance of selling the car was much higher with a renovated interior. And here is where the police suddenly discovered something that excited them and connected all the parts of the story. Donnie turned out to be the husband of Naomi, the same woman who supposedly recommended Megan for the job. At that point, the detectives realized they were getting closer to a solution. Unfortunately for them, the man's DNA was not in the database because he had not been convicted of violent crimes. They immediately went to Donnie and Naomi's house to talk to them. At first, the man said he did not know Megan, but after a few minutes, he mentioned that he had driven her and Naomi to college several times. This seemed odd compared to Naomi's statements a week earlier. At that time, she claimed that she barely knew Megan. and that they hardly spoke and did not get along in general. However, during a second conversation, the woman finally admitted that her husband indeed had driven Megan occasionally. However, Donnie firmly insisted on his innocence. According to him, on the night of the murder, he was at home with his children, allowed the police to search his home without a warrant, and voluntarily provided a DNA sample. He also denied having asked Timothy to buy a prepaid phone for him. In the house, the police found no clues and could only wait for the DNA test results, which could also take months. By then, 2 months had passed since the murder. Megan's parents received her nursing diploma posthumously. People hoped the police would capture the heartless monster as soon as possible, someone who could kill again at any moment. Finally, the laboratory results showed a complete match between Donnie's DNA and the sample found on Megan's body. He was immediately taken to the station, but he continued to insist on his innocence. Upon learning about the DNA match, he changed his story and told detectives that he and Megan had a secret relationship that he had hidden from his wife. According to him, that was why he hadn't mentioned it before. The police considered his story to be obviously fabricated, but they had to release him since there was no concrete evidence other than the DNA. And it was impossible to find 100% proof that would refute Donnie's words. Thus, the detectives were almost certain that the man was the killer, but they needed more evidence. Although they couldn't charge him with murder, they managed to detain him. During a search of his car, they found a firearm he was not allowed to possess due to his criminal record. While in custody, the police had time to look for more evidence. They didn't have to worry about Donnie attacking someone else or escaping. Soon, experts determined that Megan was shot with a weapon of the same caliber as Donnie's rifle. The detectives obtained a warrant to track his phone and check his movements on the night of Megan's murder. They compared those data with the movements of a prepaid phone that Donnie supposedly never owned. Here, the police had a significant breakthrough. The prepaid phone was close to Donnie's phone and followed the same route on the night of the crime. The detectives identified several key locations where Megan was supposedly abducted, where she was killed, and the field where her body was found. At all these locations, both phones were in proximity. Donnie's family owned several farms around Tullahoma. According to the investigation, after abducting her, Donnie took Megan to one of them, subjected her to violence, and killed her. The detectives obtained a search warrant and found a significant clue: a partially burnt bandana that turned out to belong to Megan. Her sister had given her that item. This evidence, combined with Megan's clothing and the DNA match, was enough to bring the case to trial. On November 5th, Donnie was charged with murder. At the trial, new details emerged that only strengthened the case against him. Reviewing his phone, experts discovered many interesting things. It turned out that Donnie had attempted several times to contact other women, offering them jobs as caregivers, but all those attempts failed. According to the investigation's version, Donnie found Megan's phone number on his wife's contact list. He contacted her, telling her that Naomi had recommended her as a caregiver. She agreed, and the man gave her a non-existent address, leading her to a remote location. There, he attacked her, took her to a farm, subjected her to violence, and killed her. Then he took her to a field and burned her. The final touch was the complete replacement of the carpets and seat covers of the pickup he used to transport her body. Apparently, the man feared that he could not completely eliminate certain blood traces and that the police would discover them. As for Naomi, the police concluded that she had no connection with the murder and knew nothing about it. That night, she was working, which was confirmed by numerous pieces of evidence. During the trial, Donnie declared his innocence, and everyone braced themselves for a potentially long process. However, when he realized that the prosecution would seek the death penalty, he decided to make a deal with the investigators. He agreed to forego the death sentence in exchange for a confession. As a result, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Megan and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nevertheless, after some time, he claimed that he had made the deal under pressure and demanded a review of the case. When the judge accepted his request, he quickly reverted to his previous decision to plead guilty, since a new review would again consider the death penalty. During the trial, it was also explained why the criminal, without any doubt, willingly provided detectives with his DNA sample. He apparently hoped that the fire would destroy all traces, so the police would simply have nothing to compare his sample to. But he was mistaken. With all this, investigators concluded that Donnie probably had no connection to the disappearance of another student who vanished 6 months before Megan. More suitable suspects emerged in that case, and Donnie's candidacy was no longer considered. After the announcement of the verdict, Megan's sister stated that the offender would continue preying on young women and could have taken many more lives. But Megan stopped him by becoming his victim. And ultimately, what makes this story even more tragic is that in November 2013, Megan's mother, who had been doing everything possible to help the police catch her daughter's killer, took her own life. She couldn't bear the devastating loss caused by a cold-hearted criminal. Looking at Donnie's background, it is clear that he could have been apprehended much earlier. Among his numerous offenses was the kidnapping of a young woman, but on that occasion he managed to avoid punishment and the criminal remained at large. Who knows? Perhaps Megan was not his first victim, but the police have yet to confirm this. Innocent victim of her spouse's perverse passion. They say that an adult is simply impossible to re-educate because it is a formed personality with its views, way of thinking, preferences, character, and temperament. However, some women are sure that patience and pedagogical talent can work wonders. More experienced women realize that it is important from the very beginning to consider the man who is next to her to study his shortcomings, and to understand whether she can live together with them, because falling in love and passion will pass and the negative qualities with age will only worsen. If it is not about some minor shortcomings, but about real problems such as addictions, pathological tendency to lie and violence and so on, it is better to run away from such a person without looking back. But in women, often in such cases manifests the rescuer syndrome, an acute desire and irrepressible desire to help at the cost of their own well-being. It is this syndrome ruined a young British woman named Vicky Roberts, who almost 3 years struggling for her love, trying to re-educate her cheating husband with sadistic tendencies. Unfortunately for the girl, all her efforts turned out only pain, humiliation, and cruelty. Vicky and Michael Roberts. Vicky Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in the county of Cheshire in the northwest of England. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a rather conservative and deeply religious family. Together with her sister, she attended a Christian school and also practiced music and sang in the choir. People around her described her as a very kind, friendly, and helpful girl, always ready to help others. After graduating from high school, Vicky went to university, and at the same time got a job in one of the stores of the chain IKEA to pay for her own education. It was there that the girl soon met a young man named Michael Roberts, with whom she first started a friendly relationship. The new acquaintance was only a year older than Vicky. He also got a job at IKEA in parallel with his studies, and he also played sports, carefully watched himself, and was able to make a pleasant impression on others. At first, the sociable and charismatic Michael seemed too talkative and overly intrusive to the modest Vicky, but he quickly managed to gain her attention in favor. It is worth saying a few words about Michael and his family. He was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, and was the eldest of 2 sons in the family of a prominent chemical engineer. Parents brought up their children in strictness, and high expectations always laid on the eldest heir, who studied well at school, grew up ambitious, purposeful, and able to achieve what they wanted. The guy always had a lot of friends. He could easily become the soul of any company. But most of all, he was proud of his victories on the love front. Michael had a bright and attractive appearance, was tall, trim, with a good sense of humor, and the ability to show himself at his best. To everything else, this handsome man was also very intelligent, well-read, could easily support a conversation on any topic. Parents from childhood indoctrinated the eldest heir that he is the best, the most beautiful, intelligent, and will certainly succeed. All this probably provoked in the guy narcissistic disorder, which with age progressed. At the same time, Michael was always very afraid to upset his dad and mom, and therefore did everything to be the perfect son for them and meet all their expectations. Roberts never had a permanent girlfriend. He regularly changed girlfriends and mistresses, could spin several novels in parallel, so that none of his passions did not realize that she was not the only one. The guy was confident in his irresistibility, could find an approach to any girl, and he really liked to conquer unavailable girls. This process he perceived as a kind of game or competition. Just such a modest and inaccessible girl was Vicky, which Michael decided by all means to conquer. At first, she stubbornly kept her distance and refused even innocent offers to walk after work or drink coffee somewhere. Smith spent almost all her time studying, and on weekends she went to church, so she didn't even think about dating, let alone any relationship. It took Michael a few months for Vicky to finally agree to go out with him. He was sweet, charming, touchingly courted her, gave her flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even invited her to a family dinner at his parents' house, who liked Vicky very much and immediately approved of their son's choice. Vicky believed he was serious and gave in. He became her first man and remained the only one. She was truly happy around him, and it seemed like fate to her. Michael also seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but it didn't last long. 50 Shades of Michael. From the outside, their romance seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambition, and made huge plans for the future. But soon Vicky realized that her chosen one has one peculiarity, namely an irrepressible sexual appetite and passion for experimentation in bed. At first, he did not put too much pressure on his chosen one in this regard, fearing that Vicky would leave him. But as soon as the guy realized that she would not go anywhere from him, he, as they say, opened the cards. The modest and religious girl was literally shocked by what was happening, but she was head over heels in love with Michael and therefore trusted him, and for a long time did not tell anyone about what was happening in their bedroom behind closed doors. In addition, her lover made her an official marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted, sincerely believing that after the wedding everything will change and the chosen one will stop his experiments. Soon one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she carefully disguises and hides bruises and small bruises under her clothes. She brought Smith into a frank conversation and asked if her fiancé was beating her and if she needed help. Vicky tried to deny everything, but then still admitted that all these marks are the consequences of intimate experiments. Michael, who had a special passion for binding, the use of various toys and devices. She also secretly told her friend that they have with the chosen intimacy happens up to 5 times a day, while he still remains hungry and unsatisfied. Michael considered himself a skillful lover, and intimacy for him was a kind of art and a way of self-expression. Sometimes he made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some completely crazy and even dangerous experiments. But in most cases, he still managed to persuade the girl in love with him. Unplanned pregnancy. After defending her diploma, Vicky decided to change jobs and was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also quit IKEA and got a job as a sales consultant in one of the stores of a large retail chain selling phones, laptops, and other electronics. He almost immediately became one of the best employees because thanks to his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills, he always exceeded sales targets. Soon, the new young employee was promoted to senior salesman, and the management seriously considered his transfer to the main office. But before that, he had to undergo training and improve his qualifications. Michael enjoyed attending training sessions, going on business trips to London, and was very proud of himself. He seemed to have forgotten all about his young fiancée and only remembered when he needed intimacy. They didn't talk about each other. They hardly ever went anywhere together, and outside the bedroom, Vicky seemed to cease to exist for him. At the same time, he began to have affairs on the side with colleagues, clients, and just casual acquaintances. Michael was literally obsessed and addicted to intimacy, and intimacy with different women and constant new victories on the personal front were an important part of maintaining his self-esteem. At this time, Vicky discovered that she was pregnant, and happily broke the news to her fiancé. They had already delayed the wedding, and it seemed to the girl that now Michael would hurry things up. But the news that he was going to be a father only made Michael angry and mad. He immediately began to insist that the child should be gotten rid of, because they are still so young, and they have their whole life ahead of them, and with offspring can wait. Vicky was shocked by such words, but flatly refused to terminate the pregnancy. Then the groom decided to press her in another way. Michael began to convince the bride that such news will cause anger in her religious parents because their youngest favorite daughter lived with a man and got pregnant without being married. However, according to him, the termination of pregnancy will be hidden from everyone, and after the wedding, they will certainly have children. For Vicky, it was a difficult decision, but her chosen one had a real gift of persuasion. So that a few days later, she gave in to persuasion and went to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was not without complications. Vicky, for a few days, stayed in the hospital, and then it took her almost 3 weeks to recover her health. For all this period, the doctor categorically forbade her to have an intimate life, and Michael, learning about it, went into a rage. Then Vicky finally realized that he had mental problems and a real addiction to sexual contacts. Beloved literally went crazy without intimacy and began to leave the house every day, explaining it with urgent matters at work. Vicky guessed that he was looking for intimacy on the side, but sincerely hoped that everything would change once they got married and she would help him get rid of this addiction. A loveless marriage and an adult mistress. The engagement lasted almost 2 years, and the man apparently did not even intend to marry the chosen one, because the current state of affairs suited him quite well. He had a fiancée who faithfully waited for him at home and fully served him in the household, and numerous mistresses on the side which he regularly changed. Vicky always took him at his word, and even if she found out about his cheating, she always forgave him, as long as he promised that it was the last time, and he would not do it again. But time passed. Vicky began to insist on marriage, as she wanted a full-fledged family and children. Also, this question was increasingly raised by her parents, but most importantly, the wedding was insisted on by Michael's parents, whom he really did not want to upset. Modest and sweet, Vicky, they liked them very much, and they considered her a great couple for their son, and were constantly interested in when they will get married and make them happy with grandchildren. Not without the help of their parents, organized a lavish wedding with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful away ceremony. The newlyweds looked in love and happy. It seemed that they had a long life ahead of them, but hardly any of the relatives guessed about the dark side of the man, with which his young chosen one was already so well acquainted. The newlyweds settled in a large and cozy house in the prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Roberts's parents. Michael did not love his spouse, however. Marriage made him normal in the eyes of relatives and others. Vicky never complained to anyone about his strange predilections and constant cheating, and he could continue to change mistresses like gloves. At work, he was quite successful, got another promotion, and was making good money. After being transferred to a new office, Michael's direct boss was a certain Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones, for You. She was 10 years older than him, had been divorced for a long time, and was raising a son on her own. At the same time, Carrie was quite attractive, well-groomed, and as her position required, determined and strong-willed. For a long time, she did not pay any attention to the signs of attention that she was given by a young subordinate. However, for the guy, it became a kind of signal to action. He sought to achieve this woman, connecting all his natural charm and eloquence, and after about a month, Carrie reciprocated. Lovers began to meet regularly in hotel rooms, and their relationship the woman later described as turbulent, passionate, and full of experimentation. Carrie was a mature, self-confident woman. She was undoubtedly flattered by the attention of such a young man, and she was also not opposed to trying something new. So Michael could realize with her those fantasies, which did not dare his modest wife. He constantly lied to his wife about being late at work, attending corporate trainings and the like, and told his mistress how unhappy he was in marriage, that this union was a mistake of youth, and said that he was ready to divorce, but his wife does not give him a divorce. This relationship with Carrie lasted more than a year, but since the woman had no illusions about Michael, she did not insist on divorce, and she was quite satisfied with their meetings in hotels, marks on the body in dangerous games. After the beginning of relations with Michael, Carrie began to give preference to buried clothes with long sleeves and high throat, which was unusual for her. The woman was actively engaged in sports and always liked to show others her stunning figure, and here suddenly completely changed her style. Once Hall admitted to her close friend that her lover loves to experiment in intimate terms, and sometimes these experiments go beyond reason. As evidence, she showed a bite mark on her chest, which Michael left in a fit of passion. Also on her neck, there were blue marks from squeezing by his hands, and on her wrists, there were marks from the ropes, with which the boyfriend liked to tie her so that she was completely in his power. The friend was horrified and suggested that Carrie go to the police, but she refused, noting that all this was consensual, and in most cases, he warns her about what he is going to do. But the process itself can get out of control. For example, Michael loved to strangle his partner, convincing her that it would increase the pleasant sensations of the process. But a couple of times, he was so much carried away that she lost consciousness. Vicky was very afraid of such games with strangulation. But every time she succumbed to her husband's persuasions and believed that one day he would get tired of it, he would leave his cruel and painful experiments, or she would get used to it, and would perceive them as something ordinary. Unfortunately, neither his wife nor any of his mistresses even tried to stop Michael. Open correspondence and a love letter. Vicky had guessed about her chosen one's affairs on the side even before they were married. She most likely even realized that he was addicted to it, but sincerely believed that something was about to change and her love and care can turn daring and loving Michael into an exemplary family man. But after the wedding, the situation only worsened, and the young husband himself denied his cheating, and he did it very convincingly. Vicky decided to conduct her own personal investigation and looked into her husband's phone while he was sleeping. There, she found numerous correspondence Michael with Carrie and several other girls, which he did not even bother to delete. Their content was quite intimate, moreover. With some girls, the guy exchanged explicit photos. This came as a shock to Vicky. She packed her things and decided to move in with her friend for a while. She did not tell her parents and sister anything about what was happening, afraid to upset them, so her family was sure that Vicky was happily married. Besides, religious relatives would have insisted on a divorce when they learned of her husband's infidelity. But after all, Vicky was in love and didn't want to break up with her husband. Leaving, she wrote Michael a touching letter in which she confessed her love for him and called the main man in her life. At the same time, she admitted that she knows about his cheating and does not want to put up with it and therefore leaves, but gives him time to think about it and will not yet file for divorce. She wrote it all by hand on paper and left it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Michael was not touched by the message or saddened by the departure of his wife, but he did not want to lose a quiet and submissive woman who always waited for him at home, fully served in the household and tolerated any of his antics as well as peculiar predilections. That same evening, he followed Vicky to her friend's house, picking up a large bouquet of flowers on the way. Michael on his knees apologized and begged her to return to him, promising that from now on she would be his only woman. Vicky once again believed, or rather she wanted to believe, and returned to their home, a new mistress. Naturally, Michael did not leave Carrie and continued to meet with other women. But for a while, he was extremely careful and even tried to come home for dinner, which his wife carefully prepared. He hid his phone, deleted correspondence, and even changed the password from his social networking page. At that time, he began to have an affair with a new young female employee of the company, Karen Wilson, not stopping the relationship with Carrie. At that time, the girl had a fiancé, and she was preparing for the wedding. But Michael began to persistently pursue her, making himself a miserable lover. He was so attracted to the new object of the hunt that after 2 months, he decided to break off the relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, which he was tired of. The man told Karen a proven legend about how he is unhappy in marriage and for the sake of her ready to leave his wife. Soon she surrendered, and between them happened intimacy right in the office. And a week after that, she broke off the engagement and waited for the lover to respond. However, Michael was not going to divorce, but also to interrupt the connection with a new mistress he did not want and therefore just lied to her that he had already filed for divorce and moved to live in the house of his parents. Fatal blackmail. Vicky soon suspected that her spouse continued to cheat on her, and this time decided to act for sure. She took Michael's phone while he was in the shower but could not find anything there, because he had taken into account his previous mistakes and deleted all text messages, and on the page in the social network now had a different password. Then Vicky waited until her husband fell asleep and took his work laptop, which he always carried with him, and on which, as it turned out, he did not leave his account in the social network. There, Vicky found correspondences with an already new girlfriend, in which her husband confessed his love to her, claimed that he was divorcing his wife and living with his parents. It was a real shock for her. She took screenshots of the love and intimate messages exchanged between the couple and saved them on her laptop so that she could have proof of her husband's infidelity. Vicky also looked in her husband's wallet where she found several folded checks for hotel rooms. In the morning, she presented all this to her spouse, and for the first time in their entire time together, she gave him a scandal. Michael was discouraged. He tried to apologize again and promised that it would not happen again. But Vicky suddenly said that she would tell his parents about everything, hoping that they would be able to talk some sense into him since she could not do it. Michael was literally mad from such threats. He did not want his parents to know anything and slapped his wife. Then Vicky got up and said that she would go to them immediately and then headed for the door. Her spouse caught up with her, hit her twice in the head with a heavy jewelry box he grabbed from the dressing table, and after she lost consciousness, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. The man felt no pity or remorse. He wrapped the body in a blanket and packed it into several large garbage bags, and then carried the gruesome bundle into his garage. Michael then quickly cleaned up the house, packed and removed most of his wife's belongings, and immediately called Karen, whom he invited over. They had dinner, had fun in the house where a couple of hours ago, Roberts killed his own wife and then made love in the bedroom where, in fact, everything happened. Ran off with her lover? The very next day, Michael informed his parents that his wife left him, having run away with another man. To do this, he personally went to their home and literally sobbed on his mother's shoulder, showing her messages from his wife, which he himself sent from Vicky's phone. The messages said that she had fallen out of love with him, met another man, and decided to live with him. Parents, as they could, consoled their son and sincerely bewildered how their sweet, kind, and religious daughter-in-law could do such a thing. In parallel with the phone of the deceased, Michael sent messages and her parents, which said that she fell in love with another, left with him, and asked for now not to bother her and give time. Naturally, the couple Smith immediately rushed to call their daughter to find out everything and hear her explanations. But the calls were constantly rejected, and in response only came messages asking to give her time. This seemed very strange to Vicky's parents, and they went to Michael's house to talk to him. But his story only raised more questions and doubts. And after they found out that Vicky was not showing up for work without saying anything to anyone, they decided to go to the police. An investigation, a gruesome discovery, and an escape. On the 1st of December 2009, Michael bought a shovel, several meters of rope, as well as rags and detergents from a hardware store. However, he did not manage to get rid of the body, because on the same day, the police visited him at home. Then the police could not find anything suspicious. But Michael's behavior and story raised a lot of questions and doubts. However, the strangest thing was that they did not pay attention to the huge package in the corner of the garage during the inspection. In the house, there were no clothes, documents, and personal belongings of the missing woman, which could indicate that she had left. But Vicky's laptop was in the bedroom, and the police seized it for inspection. There, they found screenshots of Michael's correspondence with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved, and then decided to make a geolocation request of Vicky's cell phone, from which regularly came messages to her husband and relatives. And then it turned out that the phone had been in her and Michael's marital home all along. After that, law enforcers again visited the house of Roberts and conducted a more thorough search, finally unwrapping a strange package in the garage. The find shocked everyone present. But then it was discovered that Michael, who had been walking with the police all this time, disappeared somewhere right under their noses. He took with him a wallet with cash so that several days he managed to hide without giving himself away. Arrest, trial, and conviction. When the money ran out, Michael came to one of his mistresses, whose name was Lavinia Tolley, and asked to live in her house for a while. In the evening, the girl heard from the news that her lover was wanted on charges of murdering his wife, and immediately, without hesitation, reported to the police about his whereabouts. At the time of his arrest, Michael was crying and said he was innocent of anything. The man insisted that his spouse died during their intimate games when she asked to strangle her with a rope belt and he overdid it. However, forensic experts found that firstly, the woman was strangled with her bare hands. Secondly, she was attacked from the back. And thirdly, there are 2 extensive hematomas on her head received during her lifetime, which can definitely have nothing to do with intimate relations. The trial of the perpetrator began in January 2010. The defendant kept insisting that his wife's death was the result of an accident and hoped for leniency. However, the autopsy results presented by experts proved that the man in cold blood hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her and hid the body in the garage. Michael Roberts was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Chris arrived in Australia around 1987, the youngest of 3 children in a family based in Canberra, Australia's capital. Canberra is unique as the only city in the country that was planned and built from scratch. His parents divorced when he was 16, a separation that seemed amicable and mutually agreed upon, prioritizing the well-being of their children to minimize trauma, which initially appeared to be successful. During this time, Chris found solace and expression in music, forming close bonds with his friends. After finishing high school, he pursued his passion for music at the National University of Australia. It's worth noting that since his teenage years, Chris had been involved in punk and heavy rock bands as a guitarist and drummer. However, the financial stability that music often fails to provide likely led him to seek employment in the local hospitality sector, where he was fortunate to find work. Despite this, many of his friends were within the punk rock scene, including a particularly distinctive individual, Nicholas Soferschreiber, better known as Nick. Their lives were tough, but filled with enjoyment. Nick was born in Australia on December 16, 1986, and grew up in the Castle Hill area. From a young age, his life was hit by a string of unfortunate events, starting with the death of his parents, the details and timing of which remain unclear. What is known is that Nick was very young when he lost his key family figures and was then raised by a cousin. Unfortunately, Nick's troubles didn't stop there. As a teenager, he started having vision problems. After seeing a specialist and undergoing various tests, he was diagnosed with cone rod dystrophy, or CRD. This condition affects color vision, causes blind spots in the center of the visual field, and leads to peripheral vision loss, progressively worsening over time. Despite these challenges, Nick's upbeat nature helped him cope well as his condition deteriorated. His zest for life led him to embark on a solo trip to the United States to attend a punk rock festival in Las Vegas. While in the US, he also visited Niagara Falls and the Grand Canyon, among other places. There's little information about Nick's educational background or employment, though some have referred to him as a journalist. However, it's clear he had a wide circle of good friends, including Chris, who shared his central passion, punk rock music. Nick never missed a concert of this genre, gradually becoming friends with band members who couldn't help but notice his constant presence, partly because of his red hair and the distinctive orange afro he grew, which stood out in any crowd. His boundless enthusiasm was hard to miss at concerts, where he was the kind of fan who went all out to support the bands, whether the venue was packed or he was the only one there. It wasn't long before he earned the nickname Ginger Ninja. Nick's party spirit and love for punk rock meant he gradually connected, not just with fans, but with the musicians themselves, often buying all their albums. His warmth won him the affection of many, so it came as no surprise that his home became the go-to place for friends and band members after concerts. Nick's place was the ultimate spot for extending the party. His close friends and family not only enjoyed the good times with him, but also looked out for him, especially after an incident at a concert where he dislocated his knee from dancing and jumping too hard. Over time, and Chris's bond grew stronger. But as we know, making a living from music isn't easy. Chris struggled to get by with his gigs as a guitarist and drummer. Meanwhile, Nick's funds dwindled due to spending on local concerts, albums, and traveling to see his favorite bands. Nick then suggested that Chris move in with him to share expenses, a proposal Chris quickly accepted. By the second half of 2012, they were living together. Life was mostly smooth, except for the occasional tension due to the constant parties thrown by the Ginger Ninja that sometimes disrupted Chris's sleep for his hotel job. During this time together, Chris launched a punk rock podcast with Nick frequently appearing as a guest, sharing his extensive knowledge of the punk scene both locally and internationally. Chris also ventured into starting his own record label, though the outcome of that project remains unclear. Their shared love for punk rock was strong, but they had their differences, leading to some rocky moments in their cohabitation. Economic issues like rent payments and domestic chores sometimes sparked disagreements. While conflicts mostly remained verbal, friends mentioned a few minor physical altercations. By mid-2013, a dispute over an unspecified damage to a garage wall escalated, with Nick asking Chris to cover the repair costs and to move out. Chris left, and Nick eventually filed a lawsuit for the damages. Although initially demanding $2,000, they settled out of court for just $1.60, reportedly ending on good terms. By this time, Nick was legally blind due to his progressing condition, but maintained a high level of independence and managed his daily activities efficiently. Chris stayed with another friend before planning a trip to the United Kingdom, which was cut short when he was denied entry, forcing him to return to Canberra and live with his mother. Friends started noticing unusual behavior from Chris, who claimed Nick was turning everyone against him, a claim others found baseless. In early November, tragedy struck when Chris's grandfather passed away, deeply affecting him. The emotional toll of his loss impacted Chris, affecting not just his personal relationships, but also his job performance at the restaurant where he worked. His co-workers and bosses noticed a marked decline in his appearance and efficiency, often seemed to be lost in thought, zoning out even as the restaurant buzzed around him. By the third week of December, after finishing a work shift, Chris texted his boss to resign, citing mental health reasons. Friends said that in the months following his move out of Nick's house, Chris tried to rekindle their friendship, reaching out with calls and messages, but never received the response he hoped for. Friendship is a two-way street, and Nick wasn't interested in reconnecting. On Christmas night 2013, their group of friends gathered at a well-known local pub, providing a chance for Nick and Chris to meet again. They sat together, seemingly at ease, and Chris even invited Nick to join him for dinner the next day, to which Nick agreed. However, when Chris tried to confirm the dinner plans on December 25th, he couldn't reach Nick, and the meeting never happened. December 26th, Boxing Day, followed. A holiday rooted in medieval times when masters would give gift boxes to their servants the day after Christmas. Today, in Australia and other countries, Boxing Day resembles Black Friday in the US, with stores offering significant discounts. Nick was seen shopping for a personal tent and camping chair that day, planning to use them for an upcoming punk rock festival in New South Wales with friends to ring in the new year. After that, Nick vanished. His disappearance was out of character, especially with an important concert looming. Concerned, his friends tried contacting him through messages and calls, but got no response. On December 28th, a couple of them went to his house to check on him, but despite their persistent knocking, there was only silence. One of them peered through a window and was struck by horror. He saw Nick's body lying on the kitchen floor in a scene that was shockingly gruesome, marked by the state of his body and the amount of blood. In a panic, the friends dialed Australia's emergency number, 000, and soon after, police and paramedics arrived at the scene. They forced their way in but quickly realized that Nick had succumbed to numerous stab wounds and had been dead for some time. After the body was taken away, investigators began piecing together what had happened and, more crucially, who was behind this horrific crime. Initially, they considered a botched robbery but ruled it out with the help of Nick's friends, who confirmed that nothing was missing. Everything in the house was intact, and there were no signs of forced entry. The news deeply affected Nick's wide circle of friends and even prompted his friend Donnie to travel from Thailand to attend the funeral and try to make sense of the tragedy. The police continued their investigation and awaited forensic results, urging anyone with information to come forward or anonymously contact Crime Stoppers. Meanwhile, Nick's many friends created a social media page titled Remembering the Ginger Ninja, where they posted photos and memories from concerts and trips showcasing Nick's ever-smiling face and the love he had cultivated throughout his life. Nick's funeral took place on January 10, 2014. Anticipating a large turnout, the announcement requested carpooling to ease parking concerns. Instead of flowers, mourners were asked to donate towards organizing an annual punk rock festival in Nick's memory. As expected, the event saw massive attendance from friends across Australia and many others touched by Nick's story. Chris, who had lived with Nick, was also there at the farewell. Additionally, a collection of band t-shirts was prepared for attendees to sign, which would accompany Nick on his final journey. As the search for the perpetrator continued, with the autopsy results in hand, police were certain they were dealing with a crime of unusual brutality, as Nick's body had 73 puncture and slash wounds. Some wounds were so severe they passed completely through his body. 3 critical injuries to his neck, severing major arteries, were fatal. Investigators scoured the crime scene area for evidence and collected statements from Nick's closest friends. These interviews likely pointed them toward the prime suspect. Reports suggested a tip-off to Crime Stoppers also steered the investigation in the right direction. Friends interviewed by the police shared insights into Nick and Chris's deteriorating relationship. After Chris moved out of Nick's house, he tried to mend their friendship, but Nick was hesitant to reconnect. During the investigation, it emerged that Chris's behavior had become erratic. He would sometimes zone out, making conversations difficult, and he would repeat things already discussed. Significantly, it was revealed that Chris had mental health issues and had stopped taking his medication in the months leading up to the crime. Friends also mentioned Chris was inquiring about the progress of the investigation, urging them to share any information they might have. Chris himself was interviewed by police and claimed he last saw Nick from a distance on Boxing Day while making purchases in a store, and they did not speak. When asked about his activities later that night, he said he was feeding his cat, or a neighbor's cat, according to some accounts. Chris's mother had been worried about him in the months before the incident and had contacted the mental health service treating her son to express her concerns. His therapist noted Chris's moodiness, avoidance of eye contact, distraction, and refusal to take his medication. In late January 2014, officers visited a property owned by Chris's family in New South Wales. The search involved police divers and emergency service members, leading to the discovery of items that became key forensic evidence in the case. By mid-February 2014, weeks after the incident, police arrested Cripps as the prime suspect in Nick's death. He was charged on February 15, 2014, pleading not guilty due to mental impairment. This was just the beginning, and the trial would be delayed as prosecutors requested more time to prepare their case. By August, the prosecution was ready to proceed in the Supreme Court. But the case didn't reach the higher court until the end of 2015. In the interim, Chris underwent regular evaluations by mental health specialists who diagnosed him with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. The prosecutor argued that Chris had harbored resentment and a sense of isolation from their shared friend group, driven by Nick's supposed influence. She claimed that on Boxing Day, Chris had seen Nick shopping from afar but didn't approach him. Later that night, Chris took 2 knives to Nick's house, was let in, and then attacked Nick in the kitchen in a fit of rage and revenge. The assault was so fierce that one knife broke, but Chris continued with the other, inflicting 73 wounds. He then took the weapons, a tent, and chairs Nick had bought, drove to a family property, and attempted to burn the blood-stained clothes and knives. However, the fire did not destroy the metal, and Chris disposed of the remains in a dam on the property. Nick's defense attorney told the jury that the crucial issue was Chris's mental state during the attack, suggesting that the frenzied nature of the assault indicated a lack of mental control. The prosecution countered, highlighting Chris's lies to the police and noting he never mentioned hearing voices compelling him to kill Nick until after the crime, suggesting it was a strategic defense move. Throughout the trial, jurors heard from friends of both men. They described Chris's blame on Nick for social rejection within their music-loving circle. Witnesses at the trial also recounted Chris's odd behavior at the victim's wake and described him as socially awkward, prone to making bizarre statements and asking peculiar questions. Witnesses claimed to have seen Chris at concerts after the incident, noting a significant decline in his ability to communicate. A childhood friend testified that after the police searched Chris's home, he received desperate calls from Chris, who claimed he was going insane alone. In an unusual move during the trial, Jurors were given iPads to view the knives used in the attack and the autopsy photos of Nick, exposing them to the gruesome evidence. Testimonies from mental health experts who had treated Chris were particularly striking. One expert noted that Chris was guarded and seemingly withheld information during an interview post-crime. It was revealed that Chris had been diagnosed with psychotic depression in 2011, but had stopped taking his medication a few months before attacking Nick. Another expert shared that Chris had been hearing voices and believed he was under surveillance by supposed criminal gang members, whom he referred to as observers, capable of mind reading. Chris claimed these observers sent messages indicating that Nick had hired a hitman to kill his family members. A forensic psychiatrist stated that Chris linked his grandfather's death to a dispute with Nick over superfoods, believing Nick was in league with the observers and responsible for the death as punishment. Chris had no intention of harming Nick until he supposedly saw an envelope of money thanked by Nicky, which he interpreted as payment for his grandfather's death. On the night of the crime, Chris saw a book cover with the word loose, leading him to believe the hitman was free and a threat to his family. This vision, along with imagining his mother with a necklace like a noose, convinced Chris that Nick posed a real danger. When asked why he killed Nick instead of contacting the police, Chris felt it was his only realistic option. He later told the specialist that while driving to his family's property after the attack, he saw a car with 9 of 10 inches written on it, interpreting it as a score for the crime's execution. Chris attended Nick's funeral, believing his absence would be suspicious. The forensic psychiatrist concluded that if incarcerated, Chris would require extensive treatment before potential release. The prosecution challenged these statements, questioning the likelihood of a psychotic individual providing a detailed account of their actions post-crime. They argued that it would be even more challenging for someone who committed a crime during a psychotic episode to do so, especially given the specific details Chris had provided. Moreover, they highlighted inconsistencies in Chris's story over time, noting changes during various interviews with mental health professionals. The prosecution also pointed out Chris's initial lies to the authorities, where he claimed the attack started at the front door, while forensic evidence showed it occurred at the dining table. They emphasized that Chris was aware enough to attempt covering up his crime by burning the weapons in his clothes. Throughout the 3-week trial, remained silent. By the first week of December 2015, the jury was ready to deliberate. The judge outlined their options: guilty of murder, not guilty by reason of mental impairment, or guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. After 2 days, the jury found Chris guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. Nick's family and friends felt a sense of relief at the verdict, though sentencing would wait until February 2016. During the sentencing hearing, a friend of Nick expressed guilt for not being able to protect him and fear at the thought of Chris being free. Nick's cousin, who cared for him after their parents' death, shared her devastation and the heartbreak over the details of his final moments, calling Chris's actions a theft of an innocent, kind, and loving person. The prosecution, noting Chris's ability to mask his symptoms for 2 years, branded him a skilled liar and a community threat, requesting a 20-year sentence, the maximum for the conviction. However, the psychiatrist reported Chris's expressions of remorse and recognition of the tragedy he caused, wishing he had not committed the act. After considering all the arguments, the judge took considerable time to deliberate, ultimately sentencing Christopher Navin to 12 years in prison on May 30th, with a mandatory minimum of 6 years before parole eligibility. Following the decision, Nick's family expressed dissatisfaction, deeming the sentence too lenient and failing to meet their expectations. They described Nick as a harmless, kind, and gentle person who couldn't defend himself against Chris's attack, wishing for him to be remembered for his life rather than his tragic end. They vowed to keep his memory and dreams alive. Public reaction on social media also echoed this sentiment, with many criticizing the sentence as overly lenient. Considering time already served, Christopher was eligible for early release in 2020, which he reportedly obtained, subsequently living with his parents under a new name, with no further public information available about him. In honoring Nick's dream, his friends successfully organized the first Ginger Fest in 2014, a tribute to the beloved Ginger Ninja. Gingerfest continued until at least 2018 with significant punk rock band support, keeping alive the memory of a young man who lived and breathed punk rock music, hoping he continued to enjoy it wherever he was. Those who knew Nick remembered him as a source of joy, hope, and love, achievements far beyond what many accomplish in a lifetime. Kara Nichols was born on May 20th, 1993. Her dad, Paul Nichols, was a businessman. Her mom, Julia Nichols, kept her job out of the public eye. Though there's no official record, it seems Kara was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. She had an older brother named Terrence, who everyone called Terry, and a younger sister whose name has been kept private. Kara was the middle child, and her parents saw her as the heart of their family. But that wasn't the only reason everyone gravitated toward her. She had this unique charm and personality that made people love being around her. Kara was outgoing, full of life, and super creative. She had a magnetic and sweet nature, making her someone you just couldn't help but like. Even her teachers were fond of her. One of them felt lucky to have taught her, noting Kara's incredible potential from a young age. Growing up, Kara was a happy kid, but adolescence brought its challenges. At 13, she got caught shoplifting and had to do community service. During her sophomore year in high school, she struggled with severe depression after the family dog died. Despite her parents' efforts to get her counseling, Kara resisted and even refused medication. The exact cause of her emotional struggle remains unclear, whether it was due to lack of professional support or some unspoken traumatic event. During this tough time, Kara began using illegal substances, eventually turning to hard drugs like heroin, which led to more problems. She started high school in Colorado Springs, where she lived with her brother Terry. But due to her addiction issues, she transferred to a more alternative school where she could graduate at her own pace. From a young age, Kara was drawn to the fashion world, especially modeling and makeup. After high school, she was determined to chase her dreams, despite her battles with substance abuse. Before she turned 19, Kara was working as a waitress while pursuing modeling, mainly in lingerie. She also thought about enrolling in cosmetology school to further her passion. Without prior connections in the modeling world, uploaded her photo portfolio to a social network-like platform for photographers and models. On her profile, Kara described herself as responsible and passionate about modeling. She was new to the scene, but took her work very seriously. Her mother, Julia, said modeling was like an escape for Kara, almost as if she took on another identity while doing it. In 2012, around her 19th birthday, Kara faced a setback. Her substance use led her to quit her waitress job, losing her main income source. That summer, she returned to her family home in Chicago, Illinois. Back under her parents' care, they convinced her to seek help, and she entered rehab to overcome her addictions. However, her stay was brief. She was expelled for not following the program rules. In August 2012, 19-year-old Kara decided to move back to Colorado Springs. She made friends with other local girls and kept daily contact with her older brother, Terry. On October 9, 2012, at 11:45 p.m., Terry got a call from Kara, who said she was heading to Denver for a modeling job. That was the last time anyone heard from her. After that call, vanished. 2 days later, on October 11th, after trying to reach her without success, Terry visited her rented room to check on her, which was unusual since he hadn't heard from her for a while. Kara's roommates, Jeremy Swope and Archie Escobedo, told him she had left for Denver on the night of October 9th. Later, her parents, Paul and Julia, came to Colorado to search for her. They found her makeup box, phone charger, and $300 in cash in her room, which was alarming as these items were precious to Kara, hinting she might be in trouble. However, it wasn't until October 14th that the family reported Kara missing to the authorities. Paul informed the sheriff's office about her history of substance abuse and recent rehab stint. According to Paul, the police didn't take the disappearance seriously, barely making an effort to announce it in local news, and suggested the family was overreacting since Kara was an adult and didn't need to check in daily. In December 2012, investigators learned about a photo of Kara on an adult content and escort service website. An anonymous tipster also claimed to have seen her in Las Vegas. Yet, after thorough digital tracking, detectives concluded that Kara wasn't connected to the escort ad. Her photo had been used without her involvement. The case's investigation progressed slowly in the months following her disappearance. Things changed when Detective Tammy Tadlock took over the case on February 4, 2013. By then, there were two more missing young models who had been seeking work on the same website Kara used to post her photos and portfolio. The then president of the National Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation of Women linked the site to at least 13 disappearances of young women who used the platform. The website issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, emphasizing their priority was to protect aspiring models and teach them how to spot scams. In the same year, Detective Tammy found an ad on a website for sexual services dated October 9, 2012, featuring a photo of Kara in lingerie. This discovery opened new leads, revealing that only a few of Kara's friends knew she also worked as an escort. One of these friends who met Kara at a party a year earlier and whose identity remained confidential shared that they both struggled with substance addiction and bonded over their time in rehab in 2012. This friend disclosed that Kara was never fully sober, regularly using small doses of heroin to stave off withdrawal symptoms, which helped her function daily. The friend also admitted to accompanying Kara to her escort appointments and confirmed that Kara financed her drug use with the money earned from these encounters. The case's renewed activity led to several calls to the authorities with potential leads. One call suggested shifting the investigation to Long Island, New York, but the law enforcement team found no evidence of Kara being there or involved in any sex trafficking network. On May 7, 2013, after accessing Kara's cell phone records, Detective Tammy's office left a voicemail for one of the last numbers contacted before Kara disappeared. The next day, Joel Hollendorfer, born November 19, 1975, and with a lengthy criminal record starting in the 1990s, returned the call. He had no known siblings and a history of theft, motor vehicle offenses, and harassment. Joel, who was 6 feet tall and weighed 194 pounds, had been married to Christina, with whom he had 2 children. His marriage was strained due to his drug addiction and frequent hiring of escorts. Joel's connection to Kara's disappearance seemed clear from the phone records, but his subsequent statement to Detective Tammy complicated the investigation. Joel confirmed owning the phone number in 2012 and said he spoke with a girl using a pseudonym that night. He claimed they texted and called for hours but never agreed on a meeting place, so he never met her in person. It was later confirmed that Kara worked as a prostitute under the pseudonym Joel mentioned. Detective Tammy pursued this lead, uncovering that Joel had listed his address in a place owned by his parents, John and Betty. A volunteer who analyzed Kara's phone records had been a reserve police officer in Santa Clara, California, and a manager for a special security program. A US-based multinational company specializing in aerospace and military industries provided additional training to him in land navigation, a skill he used in the Army, leveraging his acquired knowledge and the cell phone company's geolocation services. He mapped out Kara's last known movements from October 9th until the morning after, right before her phone went silent. According to the data, he placed Kara at the intersection of Goodman Road and Black Forest Road around midnight. This path, unusual in Kara's routine, was frequently traveled by Joel as it led to his house. Meanwhile, Detective Tammy discovered that on the day she disappeared, Kara spent time in her room with 2 brunette girls. By November 2013, authorities identified and located one of these girls from Colorado Springs, who cooperated with the investigation to piece together the events of October 9th until the friends parted ways. However, the second girl, who reportedly spent more hours with Kara that day, remained untraceable by Colorado authorities. Despite significant progress in piecing together Kara's last known activities and contacts, Detective Tammy was soon replaced as the lead investigator. Her successor doubted Kara's alleged modeling job in Denver, but couldn't prove or entirely dismiss it. More leads on Kara's whereabouts surfaced, yet none pointed in the right direction, with many suspected to be false, possibly meant to disrupt the search effort. Furthermore, new posts on the escort website featuring Kara's photos appeared, some dated months after her disappearance. Police analysis confirmed Kara had no connection with these ads. For months, the police traveled across various U.S. cities and states following the scant leads from their investigation, but to no avail. However, Detective Tammy's efforts finally bore fruit on October 2, 2014, over a year after first contacting Joel. The police obtained a search warrant for his parents' property. Executed 13 days later using ground-penetrating radar, the team identified several altered ground spots. Betty, Joel's mother, guided the search, pointing out areas where they had buried horses and other animals since they bought the property in the mid-1980s. No excavations were made at these suspected animal burial sites. However, Betty suggested searching another property accessible to Joel on Green Acres Road. She contacted the owners who allowed the authorities to search it. This second search took place on October 21 and 22, 2014. On the day of the search at the Green Acres property, police experts positioned 4 bloodhound dogs at each corner of the area. Once released, all dogs headed straight to the same spot, an area that looked recently dug up, about the size of a grave, but no human remains were found there. When the search at Green Acres started, Joel was interviewed by the police. In the recorded conversation, he confirmed speaking with Kara in October 2012, but his story changed. He admitted planning to meet her at the Waffle House, but claimed she never showed up. He also mentioned that his regular encounters with sex workers and drug addiction were the main reasons for his divorce from Christina. The detective in charge, observing Joel's reactions, explained that they had tracked Kara's movements that night using her phone's geolocation. Joel became more attentive, and the detective revealed that the last known location of Kara was just a minute away from his parents' house. Joel suggested that Kara might have followed him home to rob him, maintaining that he never met her in person. Frustrated by Joel's lack of cooperation and without new evidence, the investigation stalled for years. A breakthrough came in 2022 when Colorado Springs police located Christina Hollendorfer in Virginia. She had been reluctant to cooperate with the initial investigation, but during a meeting with the FBI, she revealed that after her father-in-law's death in 2014, Joel confessed to accidentally killing a sex worker by suffocating her during sex. According to Christina, Joel said the body was buried at his parents' property above a horse's grave. Later, in a phone interview, Christina expressed her belief that Joel's parents, John and Betty, knew their son was responsible for Kara's disappearance and were covering for him. This testimony led to Joel's arrest. In custody, he met with the police investigators. They showed him aerial photos of his parents' property and asked him to identify the animal burial sites. When asked about a specific spot, Joel denied anything was buried there. However, a week later when Betty was questioned, she contradicted her son, identifying the same spot as the grave of Milo, her favorite horse. Authorities quickly mobilized to uncover the mystery behind Kara's disappearance. A team of volunteers and FBI agents began a new search on the property, focusing on the area where Betty's horse was believed to be buried. Less than 3 feet underground, they found human remains, which were carefully extracted and sent to forensic experts for identification. It was later confirmed the remains were Kara's. The autopsy report noted significant damage to her brain, liver, and muscle tissues, suggesting a possible heroin overdose. However, due to the body's advanced decomposition, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined. So the authorities relied on Christina's earlier statement for the official report. Joel was immediately arrested on charges of second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. His bail was set at over $1 million. At a preliminary hearing on November 27, 2022, his defense lawyer argued that Kara's death was an accidental result of a consensual sexual encounter involving drug use, claiming Joel hid the body out of fear without intending her death. The prosecution countered this by stating that Kara had used up her remaining drugs hours before meeting Joel, making a drug overdose as the cause of death unlikely. They argued that Joel had killed her. The case judge concluded there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, ordering Joel to remain in custody without bail. The arraignment faced delays due to the defense's stalling tactics, aiming to buy time for Joel before the trial started. In January, when the first meeting between the prosecution and defense was scheduled, the defense lawyer chose not to make any statement. A month later, she pleaded not guilty on Joel's behalf, requesting a trial start date of June 12, 2023. In May, during a meeting discussing jury selection and media coverage, Joel's legal team objected to live social media broadcasts, arguing it could affect the trial's fairness. The defense also sought to dismiss the evidence tampering charge, citing the time elapsed since the incident. Finally, on June 10, 2023, over a decade after Kara's disappearance, the trial began. The prosecution made a striking start by displaying Kara's high school graduation photo, followed by images of the garbage bags where her remains were found. The prosecutor focused on Joel's actions, urging the jury not to scrutinize Kara's behavior. The defense attorney acknowledged Joel's involvement in Kara's death, but emphasized it was an accident, as per his ex-wife's statement. The trial featured 14 witnesses, including Kara's roommates, her family, her ex-boyfriend, and others who had contacted Kara for escort services, all claiming they never met her in person. Detective Tammy also testified, providing a detailed account of her investigation, followed by Christina, Joel's ex-partner. Christina delved deeper into their relationship during her testimony, especially highlighting Joel's 2014 confession. She described their marriage as unstable, marked by separations and reunions until they divorced in 2012. However, they reunited 2 years later. After Joel's father suddenly passed away, Joel took Christina in his truck to a gas station near his family's farm, where he confessed to killing Kara and mentioned he had disclosed the incident to his father, feeling he owed him an explanation after authorities searched the family property. Joel also believed he caused his father's death, attributing his heart attack to the shock of the confession. Christina, skeptical of Joel's story, remained silent on the matter until nearly a decade later when investigators approached her. The forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy provided crucial testimony, noting high levels of heroin in Kara's system, but argued that drug overdose alone was an unlikely cause of death. He reasoned that Kara's habitual drug use would have increased her tolerance, making a fatal overdose less probable. However, he also noted that her heroin-affected state could have prevented her from breathing properly, not fully dismissing the defense's theory, but maintaining a neutral stance, allowing both sides to leverage his testimony to support their arguments. Significant evidence presented at trial included the recording of Joel's first interview with Detective Tammy in 2014. After a lunch break, the prosecution called various crime scene experts who had been part of the initial search at the property where Kara's body was found, including volunteer geologists who explained the use of specialized equipment in 2014 to detect human remains, noting that while anomalies were found on the property, they could not confirm the presence of human remains at that time. In their closing arguments, the prosecution proposed that Joel, fueled by anger from being spurned by his ex-wife, sought out Kara for a paid sexual encounter. They suggested that his rage escalated during the meeting, leading him to strangle her to death. In the final stretch of the trial, the prosecution laid out evidence of Joel's repeated attempts to call his ex-wife on the day he met Kara, just hours before their encounter. The prosecutor challenged the notion that Joel's actions were merely reactions to an overdose death, suggesting instead that they aligned more with an intentional killing. The defense admitted Joel's actions were wrong, but argued there was no concrete proof of his intent to kill. The defense's closing argument hinged on the lack of evidence to dispute the claim that Kara's death was accidental. 12 days into the trial, after nearly 5 hours of jury deliberation, Joel was found guilty of manslaughter, significantly reducing his potential sentence. Kara's mother, Julia, presented a heartfelt testimony that echoed the family's deep disappointment and shock at the verdict, feeling the jury failed to grasp the crime's severity. The judge, bound by the jury's decision, noted that Joel's prior convictions would be considered aggravating factors, potentially extending his prison time. On August 31, 2023, Joel was sentenced to 24 years in prison. This sentence left Kara's family and friends deeply disappointed, feeling the defense had unfairly blamed the victim. Kara's loved ones vowed to attend every parole hearing to ensure Joel serves his full sentence, publicly opposing any future parole. While Julia appreciated the judge considering the aggravating factors, she found the 24-year sentence too lenient. Given the crime's gravity in the time Joel hid her 19-year-old daughter's body. The family also criticized the media's portrayal of Kara, arguing that instead of remembering her as the vibrant and kind person she was depicted as just another sex worker and addict. They emphasized that her profession did not justify her murder and the subsequent concealment of her body, which caused immense pain to her loved ones. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.